has been traded to the Carolina Panthers, and that means a lot for a lot of different dynasty assets. So let's talk about that and more today on the Dynasty Newsletter. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, joined by my co-host, Chris Allen. Chris, I guess let's start with Baker. He's the big one, right? So Baker Mayfield gets traded to Carolina for conditional fifth. That could be a fourth. And he takes a little bit of money off. Both sides pay some money, and the deal gets done. So what's that do for Baker Mayfield's dynasty value going forward?
I guess at the very least, it grants it a little bit of stability. I mean, if you look at the trade the trade details, essentially what Carolina acquired Baker Mayfield for what's basically an IOU, what conditional fifth round pick.
Right.
And also it's all contingent on if we can see Baker get to, I'm not going to say he needs to get to basically where they were at, like towards the back end of 2020, like potentially winning a playoff game. Whole roster is like looking fairly decent, because if you look at the Panthers and where their roster is at right now, good offensive firepower, like no doubt. I mean, DJ Moore getting his deal, Robbie Anderson hopefully hanging on for another season, Christian McCaffrey, yada, yada, yada. But it's still the offensive line that is still like a huge problem for them at this point. So I'm not expecting Mayfield to come out and be a world beater or even get back to, let's say, even 75, 80% of what they were in 2020. But at least let's show some progress. Let's show some steps forward being a passer, being able to play within the structure of the offense. Like, while he might not have a ton of chances to do that behind that offensive line, I do think that he can at least show some progress. Like some of the mistakes that he was showing while he was still in Cleveland, which actually you could probably trace back to the mistakes that he still had when he was back in Oklahoma, not being able to play within the structure of the offense. The moment he senses pressure, rolling out to his right and then throwing just horrendous pick after pick after pick. I mean, they were still problems in Cleveland. I'm hoping at least if he can show that he has a better processor, better ability to not, I guess, completely buckle under pressure and suffer, at least, and also throw some of those like heinous picks that he did when he was still in Cleveland. I think that will allow him to kind of claw his way back into the ranks from a dynasty perspective. Because I think at the end of the day, like just from a Sunday quarterback couch coach like type of perspective, I think Kirk Cousins is probably what, top 20 quarterback in the league.
He's like 20, yeah, probably.
Somewhere around there. I would say just above like the Andy Dalton line in terms of replaceability for quarterbacks. I would say that's probably where Baker resides, which is fine. I mean, he's better than Sam Darnold, better than PJ Walker, who's still kicking around on that offense too. So I do think that at least it provides at least some hope for the Panthers franchise. It's just they have to do a whole lot more work in order to really, I don't know, unlock is probably the wrong term, but at least build enough around Baker to maximize Baker. And while Baker also needs to get out of whatever physical, psychological rut that he's in, but at least I think it's the best move for him at this point versus just completely giving up football altogether or going to like the XFL or whatever the case may be. So I think there's some promise. There's just more work that has to go into it than just summarily saying Baker goes and plays with DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, and Christian McCaffrey.
Kirk Cousins is like the perfect average quarterback. Like, he's not going to lose any games. He's not going to win any games. He's going to put up reasonable numbers every year and get paid guaranteed a bunch of money. Actually, if Baker Mayfield ended up falling in that range, I think that would be good for his career, given where it's been so far. But I think we have to look back at last year with Kadarius Toney and how his snowball effect of every ridiculous thing made him out to be a terrible football player. And it doesn't always transition to the field in that way. Now, a lot of Baker Mayfield's snowball effect has came on the field, but if you look at it, 4 different offensive coordinators in his very young career, I would say one of them has been competent. One of them has been good. I mean, he was producing under Freddie Kitchens. And you did bring up that Carolina's line is terrible, but they have done the only thing that they could do, which is draft Icky at 6. So that should improve that offensive line a bit for Baker. And that's been another big struggle for him, is offensive line play. I mean, some of those Browns teams were just straight up awful. So if we look back at it, I mean, there's a lot of excuses that we can make for Baker Mayfield to see him produce and play well in a new situation. He was a buy before because you didn't know where he was going to go. He was young. That first overall pick kind of carries with you. So he was probably going to get another chance. I mean, I'm fairly confident Jimmy Garoppolo gets another chance. So in saying that, I would say that Baker Mayfield, we definitely should have seen that he was going to get another chance. The problem is he has to produce on the field this year, but he was going to have to do that anyways. Even if everything was hunky-dory with the Browns, they might not have gotten a deal done this year. He might have just played on the fifth-year option and said, hey, let's treat this as a one-year prove-it deal, which would have been fine for all sides. He would have had to produce anyways. So we're going to need to see a big year out of Baker Mayfield to get really like a upturn in his dynasty value. Now, that could mean he's still a buy because, like I said, they added Icky, so their line inherently is going to get, a position better. Christian McCaffrey healthy. DJ Moore, who I was thinking before the show when we were going to talk about the dynasty values of Panthers players, like DJ Moore, I feel like should have like a DeAndre Hopkins type career so far, and he's just solid for 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns, and to me, that's just not indicative of his talent. I feel like he should be in that upper echelon, and he just hasn't. And then I had this internal argument that DeAndre Hopkins did it with the likes of TJ Yates. So maybe
Brian
DJ
Hoyer.
Moore isn't Brian Hoyer. Maybe DJ Moore isn't quite as talented as DeAndre Hopkins, but I feel like he could be. And he just no one's unlocked him. I don't know that that's going to be Baker Mayfield either. So I don't think I changed. Actually, I know I did not change DJ Moore in my dynasty rankings because his rankings were already based around his own talent. You can't really look at the outside factors with DJ Moore because he's been putting up 1,000 yards basically on his own, just on his own talent. Or there hasn't been a lot around him to really help push that. It's kind of like Terry McLaurin in that way, except for DJ Moore was a mid-first round pick. So I didn't change anything about DJ Moore. I will say that Robbie Anderson's value should go up a little bit. I mean, if you needed a wide receiver this year for very, very cheap, Robbie Anderson would be a good guy to buy because Baker Mayfield's an upgrade over Sam Darnold. I don't care how you chop it. He is. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of conversations that say that it might be a camp battle. I mean, yeah, they only traded a fourth for him, and they're going to be paying a lot more for Sam Darnold, but Sam Darnold just is not it. I mean, if it is a camp battle, do you think that Sam Darnold can come out on top of that camp battle?
No, I don't think so. But I do think, though, the thing that we need to at least contextualize is what does it take in order to really maximize the talent of Baker Mayfield? Because, like you said, yeah, he was able to produce under Freddie Kitchens, but it was still volatile.
Sure.
It was still volatile under Freddie
Kitchens.
Right. And it was Freddie Kitchens. And then once Kevin Stefanski came over, we saw some more sustained success. I mean, this was an offense that was, in 2020, I think from like week 8 to the end of the season, they were top 10 in EPA per play. So they were an efficient offense. I mean, essentially, Kevin Stefanski had to run, let's say, the light version of the Kirk Cousins offense that he had to put together when he was still in Minnesota. I mean, you got some boot action, or play action passes with getting Kirk Cousins out in space. It's the same thing for Baker Mayfield, getting a chance for him to roll out of the pocket, hit his first read, and then keep the offense pushing. And that works, and that's fine. But and now you're asking, well, not you particularly, Adam, but I'm just saying that we're expecting similar types of offensive creativity or offensive malleability for the Panthers with Ben McAdoo.
And that's fair.
I don't know if we can expect the same thing just in the first year. And that's why I was kind of couching the whole, we've got Baker Mayfield in Carolina with DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Christian McCaffrey. Like, okay, cool. Like, this all sounds great. But again, let's think about what it took for Cleveland to get sustained, prolonged efficiency and success out of Baker Mayfield. Like, they literally had to have one of the best offensive lines in all of football, first off. Second of all, they had to have not one, but two of the most efficient running backs like in the entire NFL, both Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb finishing in like the top 10 in like elusive rate just last season. I mean, these are both powerful and like, really good, effective runners. And then on top of that, having at least, let's say, a so-so passing game, because of course the narrative in 2020 was that once Odell was hurt, that offense really started to take off and be more effective. Okay, fine. But still, the two key things that I said, though, offensive line and a good running game were things they had. Okay, they've got the running game down, right? But the offensive line, play calling, I don't know.
Right. Ben
I don't know.
McAdoo is a problem. That
Yes.
is
So
certainly a
that's
problem.
where I'm more focused on Baker Mayfield himself, because I'm already coming into this thinking that okay, well, we got Ben McAdoo, the dude that wore like an oversized suit to his first press conference when he was still in New York. I've got some problems with that. So I think it's more on me that from a dynasty standpoint to say that I think it's fine. Like the actionable portion that you gave out, that if you want to label Baker as a buy, I'm with that. And especially for what you're going to be like, the price you're going to be paying for them. They might be a little bit more expensive than
Yeah, it's got
things
to be a
were.
little bit more expensive because, like I always say, you have to pay for information, and you shouldn't feel upset about that. So many people
Right.
are like, "Oh, I could have bought low, but now it's too late." Well, no, technically, you could still buy low because you haven't seen the product on the field. You have
Bingo.
to pay more, but that's okay because you bought the information with the extra that you have to include in the trade.
Exactly. And I think that at this point, it's not like we're sitting at this point where Baker Mayfield finishes the 2022 season and he's like 8th overall in terms of quarterback scoring. It's not
Sure.
like the Stafford to LA trade and then he winds up being, a top 10 like fantasy quarterback. Like, we're not at that point yet. We haven't seen those results. So you still are betting on the come, but you're like, now instead of sitting at the like before even like the flop comes, we're sitting with the flop. We have some information. We don't have everything,
Right.
right? And we can still kind of squint and see the possibilities that are there and try and make a profitable hand out of all of this. But there are some other factors that we need to consider. So I think it's still fine to label him as a buy. It's just that these are the things that you're buying into before just summarily hopping into the situation and saying, well, because Baker Mayfield is a better quarterback than Sam Darnold, because he's going to have better weapons. I mean, you're going from, who was it? Rashard Higgins, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and a busted up Jarvis Landry, to Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, Christian McCaffrey. Oh, well, now everything's great. Let's chill just a little bit. Pump the brakes a little bit.
Yeah, I guess it's just got to be better than zero. But your
Yeah.
poker reference is actually the best way to explain what I mean when I say you paid for you paid for the information. So in poker, you can't see the flop unless you pay for it. And if you want to see the turn, you're going to pay for it unless you check. And then if you want to see the river, you're probably going to pay for it unless you check down to the river. So it's just like that. I mean, now we're dealt our hand. Baker Mayfield went to Carolina. Cool. Now you have to pay to see the flop. And then if Baker Mayfield does a little well, then he'll cost a little bit more in trade, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And then, you might hit a royal flush on the river, and Baker Mayfield turned his career around and just needed to be out of Cleveland. And now he's like top 14, 15 quarterback. It's in the range of outcomes. It's not likely at all, but we have to remember the reason I brought up Kadarius Toney is because neither of us were big on him, and by the end of the year, we were turned around on him just because the ridiculous narratives kept snowballing and snowballing to the point where it's like, all right, this is out of control. Like, I need to get this guy on my roster because there's no way he's that bad, and he wasn't. He was good at football, and there's no way that Baker Mayfield, like, has he been a disappointment? Yeah, I mean, for a first round pick, like, yeah, definitely been a disappointment because you're planning on paying those guys. You're planning on paying them a year early. So in that way, absolutely, he has to be considered a disappointment. But does that mean that he cannot be a productive quarterback in this league? Like, he's not dust yet, that's for sure. And like we mentioned earlier, I mean, Jimmy Garappolo is going to be a starting quarterback in this league
At some
probably
point.
this year, if not this year, next year, someone's building around him. If
Sure.
you're planning to build a team around Jimmy Garoppolo, then Baker Mayfield is still a quality quarterback in this league, or at least one that can start football games. Top 32. I mean, it shouldn't be that difficult to call Baker Mayfield top 32 if we're going to call Jimmy Garoppolo top 32. So that'll lead us into our next discussion, which is actually Jimmy Garoppolo discussion, and just essentially that he's not been traded yet, and there's not really any options except for Seattle. And we know how teams feel about being traded within division, but there's a like we had a little back and forth about this before the show. Yes, you don't want to trade within division, but you also don't want to let a $30 million quarterback just walk out your door and not get anything out of them. So I guess we'll start at the 30,000 foot view and just say, well, what do they do with Jimmy Garoppolo?
Cut him. Or find some way to get rid of him.
You have to save the money, but that's a major black eye, especially for a front office that is pretty well respected.
Are they?
Yeah,
well, I guess
individually,
so. Individually,
they
are.
Super Bowl. They went to a conference championship that, ironically, they only didn't reach the second Super Bowl because Jimmy Garoppolo couldn't hit Emmanuel Sanders on a wide open deep ball. So
I mean, it's the subject of the conversation. But no, as individuals, or even as a front office organization, then yes. But in terms of some of the moves that they've made, let's say from a player or team building perspective, the question marks.
Kyle Shanahan with player personnel is a problem.
This goes out to Ben Solak from The Ringer. I was listening to him on a podcast where they were ranking coaches, and he said he made I think he was making the joke, but he was saying that like Kyle Shanahan randomly hates his player, like half of his teams, because it feels that way, like at times. Well, just look at what's going on with Deebo Samuel right now. Like even his contract situation is still kind of up in the air. And after they made this really, like, they paid a king's ransom to move up to the 3 last season. They take Trey Lance, and now last season there was concerns about, well, how much can he really understand the Kyle Shanahan offense, arm fatigue, blah, 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 blah. Jimmy Garoppolo goes out and does what he does, takes them on another deep playoff run, falls short. And with everything that's happened, like with everything that Jimmy has been able to do inside of the structure of this Kyle Shanahan offense, well, what are you supposed to do? I mean, you just say thank you for your service and like just show them the door afterwards. I honestly don't know what the correct answer is at this point.
This is why teams won't trade for Jimmy Garoppolo, because they understand that the 49ers cannot keep his $21 million, and that's to say they probably shouldn't have kept the $21 million last year, but you got the point there with like, okay, we want to let Trey Lance sit for a year. He's the future for a franchise, yada, yada. I think that those guys should play right away. But if you're going to make the decision that your number 3 overall quarterback is not going to play right away, then fine, pay Jimmy Garoppolo the money he's owed, let him play that year. They can't do it again because Trey Lance has to start this year, no matter what. It has to start this year. Yes. So does Jimmy Garoppolo just run it back, but as the backup? No, probably not. Probably doesn't show up to work in that case.
For a backup quarterback,
right? So you're not going to do that. So then you trade him, and we talked about this before the show. Why is Carson Wentz in Washington and Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be on a couch? Like, that makes no sense to me either. So you made a good point that it was probably asking price. And in that way, maybe the front office isn't great because they might have put a premium asking price on Jimmy Garoppolo. I would assume that Washington made that call, but it's not a safe assumption because Washington is terrible. Let's assume that they made that call and asked about Jimmy Garoppolo, heard the asking price. It's like, we'll give what was it, like a 4th and a 6th for Wentz or something like that?
Right. When John Lynch what was the rumor going around? Lynch said that he had a 2nd round pick offer like in hand. I think that was the rumor that was going.
Yeah.
That he was saying that he had at least an offer for 1 second, if not 2 seconds or something like that.
Yeah. So it was basically probably asking prices. So now they're stuck. So he could still theoretically end up a Seattle Seahawk, and that's pretty much the only place that he upgrades right now, in my opinion.
Pretty
So
much, because even let's say, I mean, the Saints wound up getting their backup with bringing in Andy Dalton. I mean,
yeah,
Chicago, I mean, maybe. I mean, if they want to
yeah,
try
but
and retool things and they want to insulate themselves from whatever they want to try and do with Justin Fields like this season, I don't know, even though stylistically, the way that you would at least back up Justin Fields would not be a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo. To me, those would be two completely different offenses schematically. But that's a whole other conversation. But I think at this point, it's just trying to figure out how the salary winds up getting parsed. Because look at what Baker Mayfield had to eat, what, like $3.25 million in base
yeah,
salary in order for this trade to even go through. And that wound up being for that, and then the conditional 5th-round pick. If we believe that Jimmy Garoppolo is better, which I believe that, even outside of Kyle Shanahan, I believe that he's better. But with the financials in play, it's really tough to figure out who would be willing to take on that salary. Because I even believe that there are some teams that probably have the same question: who is Jimmy Garoppolo outside of this completely like dynamic, complex, most efficient, high scoring offense? Like, who is he outside of Kyle Shanahan? And
who even knows? I mean,
you're right.
can he get back to the first 6 games when he first joined the 49ers? Because that's the only way that I feel he is productive starting quarterback in this league. But I will say, if we can get some actionable advice about this, your current Jimmy Garoppolo situation is essentially your 1 month ago Baker Mayfield situation.
Pretty
So
much.
at that time, you probably should, if you had any feeling that Baker Mayfield was going to be a starting quarterback in 2022, then you probably trade for him 1 month ago. Well, that time is right now for Jimmy Garoppolo. So if you missed on Baker Mayfield, you could just run that back. Now, I said that I felt like Baker Mayfield was more valuable earlier because of the age. I think Jimmy Garoppolo might be a better quarterback now, but I mean, it's probably within like just five ranks, but he's also 31, right? So I will say I feel the I guess the feeling around the league is that Jimmy Garoppolo is still a starting quarterback and, in fact, might even be a franchise quarterback in a lot of people's eyes. I don't know what they're looking at to see that besides teams that take QB wins as a stat, because he's won a heck of a lot of football games and he's made deep playoff runs. But those runs almost felt like they were in spite of Jimmy Garoppolo, not with Jimmy Garoppolo, right? So, I mean, if QB wins is the stat that teams want to go for, and unfortunately, there probably are a lot of front offices that care a lot about QB wins,
Mm-hmm.
then Jimmy Garoppolo he's got a good foothold in the league, which means you probably go trade for him right now, especially in Superflex, and you need like 4 quarterbacks. Jimmy Garoppolo is a great trade target. Who cares where he ends up, because the league feels like he's a quality starting quarterback in this league.
No, I think that's the biggest point, is that when it comes to quarterbacks, I think some of us, and myself included, need to take our own feelings about the quarterback like out of the equation and just try and understand whether or not we believe that the coaches or GMs or like whomever offensive play callers still think that that particular quarterback can be a starter in the league. And if the answer is yes, then we should probably try and have him on our rosters for cheap and then see what happens afterwards. And especially in the situation of Baker Mayfield, 100%. Like there was no doubt that once he found a landing spot, he would be considered a starter, like on that particular roster, whether it be Seattle, whether it was going to be Carolina, or whichever empty chair that he could find. And the same thing is for Jimmy Garoppolo as well. Like I think we would most likely view him as the starter, like once he got to someplace, like unless there's some rumor that comes out and says that he's accepted a backup position or something along those lines. But if you can answer the question with yes, that you would view him as a starter, like on whichever rosters that might be available that can take on a quarterback, and you can acquire him for cheap, then do that.
Sure. Before we get to our last topic, I just want to remind everybody that the topics we're discussing are coming from the Footballguys newsletter, brought to you from Sigmund Bloom, Cecil Lammy, Joe Bryant. that email will come straight to your inbox on a daily basis. Even in the downtime of July, we're still bringing you news to your inbox, and then Dynasty Newsletters parsing through that news and pulling out the topics that are relevant to your Dynasty roster. So please subscribe to the newsletter, the Football Guys newsletter from Joe Bryant, Cecil Lammey, and Sigmund Bloom. Last thing I want to talk about is Treylon Burks, who I feel like has a almost disrespectful ADP. And this is another one of those situations where it's like, this is Jamar Chase can't see the stripe on a football, so it's difficult to catch. Just drop, drop, drop. You have Treylon Burks having some tough practices. Dude, the NFL's hard. Look, all right, you make the point that Mike Vrabel doesn't like wimps. Okay, get it. Treylon Burks hunts wild boar with a knife. He takes a couple dogs, a knife, and a prayer and kills wild boar. I think he's Mike Vrabel's kind of guy. Like, yeah, he might be a bit winded right now, but if that's gonna be, dude, he's gonna be a dog, and Mike Vrabel loves dogs, right? So I don't see any way that Treylon Burks ends up being third string. And we were discussing that earlier. Where's he listed on our lads in the slot? Fine. But what do we care about 2 wide receiver sets? So is he going to play predominantly slot and 3 wide receiver sets? But in 2 wide receiver sets, is he going to be ahead of Westbrook? Probably, in my opinion. Like, why wouldn't he? What has Nick Keenan Westbrook? I think I pronounced the Keenan part wrong.
Westbrook Akine.
Westbrook Akine. Sorry. What has he done to basically earn his role over new first round pick Treylon Burks into wide receiver sets?
Not have asthma. That's what he's done to earn that particular
but they would
spot.
have known that. Like, they interrogate every inch of these men's bodies. You don't think that they knew he had asthma prior? Like, if he had an inhaler, which you'll have an inhaler if you have asthma, they know.
Well, who is they though? Because they could have just been Tennessee's like front office, and Vrabel might not have been aware of that fact until he got there. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and preface this all, folks, that I send Adam ludicrous texts on the regular with takes on players.
This is your fault.
If Adam were ever to release them, I will sue him for all that he's worth, because those are not allowed to reach light day. But I will admit that one of the texts that I did send him at one point said that the second Treylon Burks pulls himself out of a game or has to come out because he's winded, Mike Vrabel will be angrily smoking a cigarette like on the sidelines and blowing smoke in Treylon Burks' face as he rides the pine for pretty much the rest of the season. I can almost guarantee you that, because it's just ridiculous. That he better not. Like, Treylon Burks doesn't have an option. Like Mike Vrabel is like, that's just not, especially after I'm not going to say like Julio Jones the diva, but just like after the things that he had to deal with just last season with like Julio Jones not practicing because he gets veteran preference like on these days, and then also with the injuries like piling up, blah 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 blah. Like, they were just never going to be in sync because Julio Jones doesn't play that way at this point in his career. And now to see Julio Jones exit and then Treylon Burks with at least just this one, hopefully minor ailment come in, I took it like I went from 0 to 100 real quick. It was just like, yeah, Mike Vrabel hates this guy.
I like to picture a scenario in which the medical department is talking in the like side of the room about going over players during the draft and just making sure that they got all their T's dotted and their I's crossed. And Vrabel overhears them saying that they're taking Treylon Burks off the draft board because of the asthma. And he was like, wait, is that the guy that hunts the boar with the knife?
Oh, yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean,
I would have liked that guy.
I heard that. And he's like, nah, put him back on the board.
Yeah.
Taking him in the first round. In fact, trade A.J. Brown.
Yeah, get rid of that
guy.
Yeah.
Has A.J. Brown ever hunted boar with a knife? No? You sure? All right.
Get him out.
Trade him out of here.
But no, I think the point that you made though, and the concern that we should have as dynasty managers is what is the 2 receiver set going to look like? The expectation would obviously be that Treylon Burks like takes on that role. But like we said, I mean, Our Lads, great site. Like, please, like, don't think that I'm bagging on them or anything like that, but they are making an assumption. And I think it's probably the right assumption. As I've mentioned on this podcast, like multiple times, the comparison that folks were making, oh, yes, they get rid of AJ Brown and then they draft Treylon Burks, who is an AJ Brown clone. Like, no. That is an incorrect comparison. Matt Harmon, whose work I reference on the show and pretty much all my content whenever I get to start digging into wide receivers. If you look at his success rate against man and press coverage, 42nd percentile against press coverage, 11th percentile against man coverage, like according to Harmon. I mean, this is not a guy that we should expect to be seeing win consistently on the outside, at least at this point in his career. So it would kind of make sense that he would be like their starting slot receiver. So in 3 wide receiver sets, we'll see him out there all day long. But if they do commit to 12 personnel or anything like that, where they're forced to go with 2 wide receivers on the field, we might not see him on the field. That is as entirely within the range of outcomes, unless he has now expanded his role or expanded his skills as a receiver. And we haven't heard that yet because he had to sit out of OTAs because of asthma. So just at this point, there is a fair concern that his snaps might be limited in one part of his rookie season. And that's like such a very small window of opportunity for what we expect for him to be a long career. And so I do think let's say the comparison to Chase and the white stripes thing, I think, is apt, but we can't expect we can't expect Treylon Burks to break the rookie receiving yardage total like Chase just did. He's not attached to the same type of quarterback, doesn't play in the same system. Also is not playing along another alpha wide receiver in T. Higgins to help draw coverage, like blah, 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 blah. But I do think that at least that comparison is apt in the sense that we can't just summarily say because of this one smallish thing.
Not even training camp yet.
Right, not even training camp yet. And the smallest thing that we should expect him to be able to not get over, but at least be able to manage. And it might affect him at the start of the season, but 3 games out of 3 to 4 games, let's say he has to, swap in and out, or let's say even for the first 6 games, we don't see him as much on 3 wide receiver sets or 2 wide receiver sets, excuse me. But 6 games is still a third of the season, a third of one season in like let's say what we hope to be a 10-year career. Or let's say even for dynasty managers, we have them on our rosters for 3 to 5 seasons. We care about 6 games out of what's 5 times 18, 90? No, you're not going to care about that. So I do think that it is important to keep that in context before we start summarily like dropping him down our ranks.
Yeah, he definitely shouldn't hit. And I think I mentioned this on a past show. So his ranking was already a little high because some people were taking him like 102, 103, and I felt like that was a little rich, even as somebody who's a fan of Treylon Burks. So now maybe his ADP is dropping a little for a reason that I don't feel is fair, but it's still inherently getting corrected. In my opinion, Garrett Wilson should still be ahead of him. Jameson Williams should be ahead of him.
Sure.
Drake London should still be ahead of him. And then it's Treylon Burks for me. So in that sense, it's like, okay, now he's firmly behind those guys, but because of something that I guarantee the team knew about, like 100%. Like I went to join the Navy. I wrote asthma on my thing. Oh, sorry, you can't join the Navy if you have asthma. So I take that to my doctor. I'm like, hey, I can't join if I have asthma. She's like, okay, you don't have asthma now. Like it's manageable, and like it can be serious, but he just came from playing serious Division I football.
Right.
He's not like broken, and people have been treating it like he's done, and he's not, like he's fine. It just so happened that media covered, one time Treylon Burks, who was bent over, found out, caught wind that it might have had something to do with asthma, and it's been snowballing since then. But I guarantee you, if you went to every rookie minicamp, you would have found Garrett Wilson out there with his hands on his knees. You would have found Drake London out there with his hands on his knees. Like, this is the NFL. It's harder for a reason. You get paid a heck of a lot more for a reason. So it's tough, and especially Vrabel running the practice, right? I mean, I'm sure it's even tougher. So
Yeah.
I guess the actionable news is if he's fallen in your leagues even further out of favor than the wide receiver 4 in this class, definitely try to capitalize on that now. Because once we get into training camp, we'll start getting some positive buzz, and then it's going to be like, okay, well, I guess he's going to be fine since he was, fine 6 months ago. He's probably fine now.
Yeah.
So that's going to do it for us today. Please remember that we are going to be on our own feed on Spotify and wherever else you get your podcasts. So it will not be found on the Audible any longer. We have all earned our own spots on our own feed. So please make sure that you subscribe to those feeds, like, comment, rate, review, all those good things to help us with the YouTube overlords. And that's going to do it for today. We will catch y'all next time.
Peace.